Hello, friends. This is Christopher Davis-Shannon, and today we need to have a very difficult discussion that I personally have been avoiding for quite some time. You see, I spend a lot of time making videos about technique and harmony and chords, and you spend countless hours practicing chord changes and new songs and new strumming patterns and new strumming techniques. But ultimately, none of this matters if we never think about one other thing, and that is the sound coming out of our instrument. I'll never forget one specific day when I was 16 years old and sitting in the band room at my high school when I should have been in math class. But I was practicing and running tunes with a drummer who went to the university down the street. He was helping out with our high school jazz band that I played bass in. And at some point, my naive teenage self made a passing comment about how much easier his instrument was than mine because all he had to do was hit a drum with a stick. And without a word, he just handed me a drumstick and said, hit the snare drum. So I took the stick and I hit the snare drum. And then he took the stick out of my hand and he hit the snare drum and looked at me and said, do you understand now? Because the sound that he pulled out of that instrument by just hitting it with a stick was 10 times more beautiful than the sound that I was creating by hitting it with a stick. And a lot of times we get in that same mindset on ukulele. All we're doing is strumming, right? Or plucking if you play fingerstyle. But the sound that we make out of this instrument is ultimately the thing that matters most. Now fast forward about 4 years when I'm in university myself studying bass. And I walk in for a lesson and my bass teacher asks me, he says, when you walk into a club, what's the first thing that you notice about a band? I think, well, of course, they're listening to the burnin' solos. He goes, no, you don't. I said, you're right. I'm a bass player, so I'll hone in on the bass and thinking about the lines and the changes that are going on. He said, no, you don't. I said, okay. So I want to think a little bit more in depth. So I go, oh, you're right. The groove, right? Like how the music moves. So he goes, now you're getting close. That's the second most important thing. I said, well, I'm stumped. What's the most important thing? He said, when you walk into a club, the first thing that you notice before anything else is the actual sound. And the whole point was that before we worry about playing crazy solos or walking the hippish changes or even just strumming a few chords, we tend to forget about just making a pleasing sound out of our instrument and how we do that. The thing is, we're playing an acoustic instrument. Most of the sound is in our hands and under our control. We're not tweaking knobs on an amplifier. So one of the most important things to think about on any acoustic instrument is the sound that we are making. Now, I can't tell you how to make the perfect sound on ukulele because my hands are different than yours, my uke is different than yours, and my ears are different than yours. What your perfect sound is not my perfect sound. But we want to find a pleasing sound. And there are some technique things that we can do, and certainly some things we can think about to aid in that. And the first thing that I always teach my beginner students is finding the sweet spot on their instrument. Where does your uke sound the best? So if I'm coming through, we know that the sound changes dependent on where we are strumming or plucking if you're doing fingerstyle on the instrument. Up here by the nut, we get a softer, less articulate sound. As we move back towards the bridge, it gets a little bit more nasally, right? Now for most instruments, the general starting point is where the neck meets the body. This is kind of our home base that we can always come back to. But spend a little bit of time this week playing with the position of your strumming or plucking and find where you like the sound of the instrument, but do this outside the context of a song. Just pick one chord and truly think about listening to the sound of the instrument and where it sounds good to you. I know that for me, it's actually just a little bit above where the neck beats the body. This is my sweet spot where I can do what I need to do. Now I can also move around to get a different texture out of my instrument or a different tone. But you want to have a place that you can always come back to, your home base for tone. Spend a little bit of time this week just playing open chords and truly listening to the sound so that it's not one more thing you're thinking about while you're playing a song. Now, after you find your sweet spots on your instrument, then we start thinking about the attack or the front of the note. And the way that we think about this is really how fast our hand is traveling across the strings. And everyone's attack is a little bit different. Some people prefer a slower attack, where we can hear each individual note a little bit. Some people like a fast attack, so you just hear the full chord. Slow attack, it's very different. And depending on the song, you might want a different one. But this is something also to keep in the back of your mind, is play with how fast you're actually coming through the strings, and thus how quickly the whole chord is sounding. How fast we attack the note can make it sound much more articulate and can make it sound more precise, but there are other times that we want a slower attack to it. But much like with the sweet spot, we want to find our foundation, our place that we always come back to that is our sound. Now the next little bit that we need to think about is the amplitude, or how loud or soft things are. And in music, this is what we call dynamics. And the uke, it is especially important to keep this in mind because it's such a small body, and we think about the sound is really coming off of the soundboard of the instrument. This is acting as a speaker and projecting it forward. But this is a very small soundboard. We can't push it as hard as we can a guitar. So we have a tendency, especially when we're beginning on the instrument, to just play too hard. There gets to be a point on uke where we don't get a sweet sound and a louder sound out of it. We just start to degrade the sound, and in fact it becomes a little bit distorted. And you can hear this if you listen to Django Reinhardt's recordings, because they would play so loud acoustically that you actually hear the tops of the instruments start having a natural distortion to them. And it's a beautiful sound at times, but not something that we always want to have. So when we think about dynamics or amplitude, how hard we're hitting the strings, we want to find an amount that we hit the strings that gives us, again, a pleasing sound. A nice medium dynamic that, again, we can always come back to. So we add this in. So now we're thinking about where's our sweet spot? How fast are we attacking the strings? And now how loud are we actually playing? Where is our medium sound sitting? Where's 5 on our volume dial? And once you have that, then we go back and we talk about opening the dynamic window. How soft we can get and how loud we can get, because there are limitations. You can only play so soft and so loud on an instrument. And you need to find where that is on your instrument and how your hands need to work to make that happen. An exercise I always have my students do is just a 4-measure phrase, 4 downstrokes per bar, starting at pianissimo, very quiet, and building up to as loud as we can get, and then all the way back down to quiet. So we can truly feel how big this dynamic window is and how open we can make it. It ends up sounding a little bit something like this. And we get as quiet as we can on there, and it takes an awful lot of control. And you'll find that the more that you do an exercise like that, the wider your dynamic range gets, because you get used to the more nuance of strumming very lightly and necessarily how loud we actually can strum without degrading the sound quality. Now we've talked all about the right hand here, but actually the left hand has a very big role in sound production as well. And generally, we think about our left hand as being legato or smooth. And you'll see me talk about this in videos where I talk about keeping fingers down as long as possible when we go to other chords. If you lift it up early, we get spaced, right? And we don't want that. We want to hear the sustain, how long the notes are truly supposed to be held for. So we keep our left hand down as long as possible so that to give it this connected sound. But the other thing is actually the pressure that we put down with our left hand matters. Sometimes we tend to press down too hard, and that can throw the uke out of tune, but also just give it not such a great sound quality. I'm pressing down a little bit too hard right now. You can hear the fret interplay in there. You want to strive to have the lightest touch that you can have while holding down the string, and that's also going to make it easier to change to the next chords. And now we have to put it all together and find your sound. And the ultimate thing that we can do is listen. We all have players that we love, and we want to listen to their sound and try to replicate their sound. And this can be numerous players. We're pulling from different places to find our own personal sound. And remember that this doesn't have to be just uke. If you like, say, Wes Montgomery, maybe you want to play more with your thumb and get a nice muted sort of sound. But regardless of what type of tone you like and who you hear it from, listen to their recordings, but now listen with an active ear into how fast are they strumming through the strings? How are they attacking it? Is it a more nasally sound? Are they strumming more towards the bridge, or is it a sweeter, softer sound closer to the nut? How big is that dynamic window? Really think about all of these little aspects that we've talked about in this video. And from there, you could start piecing together your sound. Much like with other things in music, we don't all have our own individual distinctive identity as we would like. We are all, even if unconsciously, pulling from players and sounds of the past. And we do this in composition as well. You've probably heard that there's nothing new ever being written. It's all already been written. And just like that, all sounds have all been made, but we can pull from different sounds to make our own. So spend some time listening to the players you like and analyzing how they get to that sound, and specifically why you like their sound. It's not enough to say it's a pleasing sound. Say, why do I like this sound? And once you have that, then you have to figure out how to do it on your instrument. We've talked about some tools in here as to how we do this, but one of the most important practice things that you can do in regards to sound is to record yourself play. Because ultimately, we have a very poor perspective of how the instrument sounds by sitting behind and over top of it. So we were talking about earlier, the soundboard emanates the sound this way. So we're not truly hearing the sound of the instrument. We're hearing it from back here and the reverberations off whatever is in front of us. So by recording yourself playing, and by recording, you do not need fancy microphones. Most of us have a phone like this in our pocket with a sound recorder. That's enough to give us a good perspective, because you might find that you don't like your sound from behind the instrument, but it's very pleasing out front, or vice versa. And that's one tendency. We tend to hit the instrument too hard because we're not hearing the full voice of the instrument. We're trying to pull more than we actually need to out of it. So how we can practice this is spend just a few minutes each day before we practice all these new things, before we learn new songs, just meditating on strumming one chord and thinking about absolutely nothing but the sound coming out of our instrument. Because in the end, this is the one thing you're going to be judged on the most in music. I'll see you all next week.